I got it.
All right.
I remember to click record. Well, welcome everyone to our security training here at Action Network. Thanks everyone for introducing yourselves and saying what you'd like to learn. We will definitely be covering a lot of these questions about Google products, general security, security for all of your accounts, everything security related that we can tackle in an hour. My name is Amy Chin-Lai. My pronouns are she, her. I am the solutions engineer at Action Network. That means I am one of the backend engineers, and I also manage our integrations program, and I'm our deliverability expert. This is my dog, Axel, also affectionately known as Axel Waxel. Here he is at the Fala statue at the FDR Memorial because he's a Scotty. It was very cute. It's adorable. If you want to follow him on Instagram, he's at Prince of Parkview. He loves his followers. And we're also very lucky to have Tris join us today.
Yeah, so hey, I'm Tris Wilson, she, her pronouns. I'm the security and DevOps engineer at Action Network. So I focus on security and development of our internal infrastructure, internal tools, that sort of thing. So this is my cat, Ranger. He's not anywhere interesting, just on top of my laptop trying to stop me from working. So yeah, all right. So this is the general outline for the training today. We'll start off by talking about threat modeling. The idea there is that if we know who we're trying to protect against and what kind of threats they can pose, we could do a better job of designing defenses. We'll talk about some best practices for several areas of security. So we'll start off with password and sign-in security, how you can protect yourself when using web services. So email security, specifically what you can do to protect yourself from malicious emails before they cause harm to you or your org. Physical device security, so how to protect your device and the data on it from physical threats, whether that's theft or just somebody having access to your laptop at a coffee shop for a few minutes. We'll talk about internet security, so basically the opposite of physical device security, how to protect your laptop and phone when they're connected to the internet. And then vendor security, so that's us. We'll talk a little bit about how we protect your data on Action Network and Action Builder and what you can do to make your data as safe as possible. So. Yeah, so we'll start off, like I said, by talking about threat modeling. The idea here is to consider what kinds of threats to your information exist. In security, we generally like to talk about the CIA triad. It's not at all related to that CIA. The C is for confidentiality. So we're talking about keeping your secret information secret and not accessible to other folks who aren't supposed to see it. There's integrity, that's the I. Your information isn't modified without your permission. And then availability, which is your information is accessible when it's needed. We're mostly focusing on confidentiality and integrity here. Availability is more of a concern for your org's IT or the cloud services that you use. So in terms of kinds of attackers we want to protect against, the first one is opportunistic attacks. So somebody gets your password from a data breach and tries to log in with it on other websites. Not really targeted at you. Maybe they're doing this to thousands or even tens of thousands of accounts at once. Maybe your laptop is stolen at a coffee shop because it looked shiny and expensive, and when you come back from refilling your coffee, it's not there. Again, not really because you're in the politics space, just because theft of opportunity. Maybe you fell victim to a large-scale phishing campaign to steal your email password. You're not the only victim. The goal of that sort of campaign is to just get more email addresses to send spam from. But it's a risk. Maybe you loan your phone to somebody and they're trying to switch to the phone app and they accidentally see your emails and get curious. That's the sort of thing we're talking about when we're talking about opportunistic attacks. There's also hacktivism. This is a lot riskier. It's where your organization is targeted for political reasons. Maybe the attacker has done their research. They know the services that you use, where your office is, who your staff are, what passwords you've used in the past from data breach collections. These folks generally are a lot more dangerous because they want to get at specifically your files, emails, and data to cause damage to your organization. The defense mechanisms for hacktivists and folks who are just trying to attack you given the opportunity are pretty similar, but the risks are a lot different and hacktivism is a lot more serious of a threat. Then there's financially motivated attacks. Typically, these folks aren't really interested in how your org works. Maybe your financial handling, money handling processes are interesting to them. But really, they just want to steal your money. They might send emails pretending to be somebody important to your organization, like an executive director, and they might seem like they know a little bit about your org. But the threat here is really, really different than the first two. Finally, state actors, we're not really going to talk about these. when we're talking about internet security, there's really no such thing as a perfectly secure system, just varying levels of safety and usability. So if you think about a computer completely disconnected from the internet in a concrete vault, that's not really a very usable system because it's in a concrete vault, but somebody could still break in and steal the data if they, say, picked the lock or something like that. You should always assume that sufficiently motivated and skilled attackers, like a nation state actor, can get at your data. The idea here is to just focus on increasing the level of motivation and skill required as much as possible to make sure that you're not a target. So now that we know who we're protecting against, we want to know what exactly we're protecting. In security, we talk about minimizing the attack surface. By attack surface, we just mean what are the things that attackers can look at to steal data, get credentials, stuff like that. If we can minimize the number of things we have to protect, that might be, let's see, moving sensitive data to secure devices. That might be separating personal accounts from work accounts. Maybe it's not printing sensitive documents, and so on. We can focus our efforts on securing just a few things instead of a lot of things, and that makes our job a lot easier. We could be a lot more effective. So.
Cool. So now we will talk about the easiest way to keep things protected, which is with your password and credential security. And I just want to note that we'll be pausing at the end of each section to take any questions. And we'll also have time at the end too. So the biggest problem with passwords is obviously password reuse, using the same password for multiple accounts. And this is an issue because if someone gets access to one account, then they get access to all of your accounts, which can become a huge problem. But using different passwords doesn't actually solve everything. You're still vulnerable to things like phishing. So if you were entering your Google password, for example, on a website that has 3 O's in Google instead of 2, that would be phishing. And you would put your password in there, then they would have your password, and that would not be good. So the best mitigation for this is two-factor authentication. This is super easy to set up, and it protects you in so many different scenarios. And I really encourage you to get this set up on your most important accounts today, like your Gmail, your Action Network, all that good stuff. Two-factor is important because there's 3 different authentication factors that someone can have. It's something that you know, like a password, something that you have, like a phone or security key, and then something that you are, like a fingerprint or a Face ID. So with two-factor authentication, also called 2FA, it means you need 2 of those factors to log in. And there's a ton of different options on there. So you can use your phone, you can use a YubiKey, which is this thing that plugs into the USB port of your computer. And these are called security keys, and they are actually the best way to protect. The problem is they don't really work with everything. So Google accounts are compatible with YubiKeys, but a lot of other things aren't. And it's impossible to get your account compromised via traditional phishing if you're using a security key, because if you are plugging your security key in on a Google with 3 O's, the YubiKey doesn't have anywhere to authenticate itself. So you know it's phishing. So that's super helpful. But if security keys aren't an option, authenticator apps are the next best option. So this is something like Google Authenticator or Authy. I personally prefer Authy. I think Google Authenticator has a horrible interface, and I really hate how how it updates every 30 seconds, regardless of when you open the app. I can go on a whole rant about this. But basically with Authy or Google Authenticator, you'll scan a QR code on setup with your phone, and then it will generate a code that changes every 30 seconds that you will then input after you input your password. And this is cool because it works on multiple devices. So if you lose one device, you're still able to access your accounts if it's also on a different device. And your password manager might also generate two-factor authentication codes, but be super careful with this, because if you're logged into your password manager somewhere, then that means that they have, and someone gets into your password manager, then they are on your, have all your passwords, and they have all your two-factor codes, which makes things less secure, and they'll have both authentication factors. But also keep in mind that 2FA doesn't make you immune to phishing or copycat sites, but it really can help. In this case, you know, if you have 2FA set up on Action Network and you are asked to log into a phishing site, a copycat site of Action Network, and it's not asking you for your 2FA code, then you would know that it's a problem. The worst 2FA option is text messaging or phone call authentication. So that's when it would send you a text with a code or call you with a code. If a server supports that in addition to another 2FA method, just turn it off. you're not going to need it and it makes things less secure. And the reason it does that is because of this thing called SIM swapping. So with SIM swapping, attackers can call your carrier support. So they'll call Verizon or T-Mobile or Sprint or AT&T and ask them for a new SIM card. And they can also go in person to ask for a new SIM card. And they'll use social engineering techniques to trick the employees to convince them that they're you, or they might have someone on the inside helping them out too. So a really good way to mitigate this is to set up a support pin, which basically when you are using your carrier, you have to input a pin in order to get support. We have more information about how to set this up in our security checklist. We will be sending out a great security checklist after this training and make that available in our help docs as well, so you have access to that. But it's super important that if you are using SMS or phone call based authentication because nothing else is available, that you have a support pin set up. There's also a really good podcast episode on Reply All that talks about SIM swapping and how easy it is to do these social engineering techniques. So if you're interested in how that happens, check it out. But a good mitigation for this is to set up a password manager. So after you've set up two-factor authentication, your next step is to change all your passwords. And that means that they should all be unique and not reused between services. And, honestly, that's really hard to remember, which is where a password manager comes in. We recommend LastPass, 1Password, Dashlane. We personally use LastPass. And these tools generate totally random passwords and then store them securely. And then there's browser extensions and phone apps that autofill those passwords from your password manager. Which avoids phishing attacks, because if you're logging into the Google with 3 O's, you're going to see that your password isn't auto-filled, which should be a hint to you that you're getting phished. And this is also something, the password managers, they also have team accounts. On LastPass, they have a team account. That's what we use. So you're able to have that set up for your entire team. So that's great for folks that are more than just a one-person digital team. With your password manager, though, you have to make sure that your master password is really good, because if someone gets access to your password manager, then they have access to all your passwords, and that's a problem. So the traditional ways of making a password more complex, like swapping an E for a 3 or an I for an exclamation point, don't really help. Computers are a lot smarter than us and can figure this out super easily. So a better option is a passphrase, which is just a bunch of randomly selected words. And it's really important that these words are in fact random, not like a combination of all your kids and pets' birthday months. There's this method called Diceware that generates passphrases using physical dice rolls. We have it linked in the security checklist. But we recommend using that instead of doing the random passwords for your master password. And also it's easier to remember. So a quick little audience participation. Which password is better, the first one or the second one? Yes, most of y'all are correct. The first one is the more effective password. You can make up a story to help you remember it, but the 12 randomly selected characters are actually easier to guess than the passphrase. In fact, it is 2 times harder for a computer to guess the passphrase, but it's a whole lot easier for you to remember. So use passphrase. But as you have your passphrases and your passwords and everything, there's also the inevitable factor that at some point you're probably gonna have to share a password. Generally, you should avoid this if at all possible. It makes it a lot harder to keep accounts secure, and it really makes it hard to do two-factor authentication since multiple people are sharing the same account. But check and see if the platform can support individual accounts per person instead. That way, you won't have to change a shared password when someone leaves the organization, and you get all the benefits of 2FA as well. But if you have to share a password, which happens, your password manager probably has an option for this, so you can share the password in a secure way with your colleagues. So just avoid sharing passwords, over email, chat, text message, Slack. Avoid doing that. Another credential that you'll see pop up is security questions like what city were you born in? What was your first job? What kind of dog do you have? These are typically not good at authenticating that you actually are who you say you are, because all this is available via social media. What city you were born in, your mom definitely posts that every time it's your birthday. It's like, I remember when my baby was born at Medical City, Dallas. And, you know, it's a whole situation. And then there's an embarrassing picture of you that you don't look good in, and everyone's upset, except for your mom. What was your first job? That's probably on your LinkedIn. And what kind of dog you have, your dog probably has an Instagram, and your dog probably follows my dog, or it should follow my dog. So an effective mitigation for security questions is to use those passphrases again. Use those random words, like if you're using manger cider or smirk vanity as your dog's breed or your mom's maiden name, people aren't really going to be able to guess that and figure that out via social engineering. And you can store this in your password manager so that you don't have to remember it. One thing we don't recommend is using random characters, because if you're ever in a phone conversation with a support person, they may just end up skipping the question altogether because it's so difficult to be like exclamation point, capital E, lowercase q. So it makes it less secure at the end of the day. So key takeaways, and if you have questions, you can go ahead and type them in. So enable two-factor on your most important accounts today. Do all of them, you know, in the next couple days. Sooner the better. And get a password manager and start making all of your passwords unique. And don't share passwords if it's avoidable, and never do it via email, chat, or text message. So, oh, sorry, Tris, oh, Tris, what do you think of as a password manager?
KeePass is a fantastic option. KeePass XC specifically, I think, was mentioned by someone in chat. We have a link to that on our security checklist. It's a super good option as long as you're able to take care of the sharing considerations and you're willing to handle multi-device sync by yourself. Chrome Password Manager is better than nothing. It's not great from an offensive security perspective. If there is somebody targeting you and your computer, and they get access to your computer when it's logged in, they will be able to get your Chrome passwords, even if they don't know your login password or so on. So definitely be careful with that. There were a few other questions, passphrases in regards to like number and symbol requirements. Generally, you can get around those by just sticking a 1 or an exclamation point at the end. Normally, this is pretty bad advice. Because, you know, putting a 1 and an exclamation point at the end of the password is a really common pattern that makes it easier to guess. But when you're working with passphrases, you already have all of the randomness you need to make your password secure in there. Complexity policies like that aren't really written with passphrases in mind. And then I think I saw somebody ask about Google Docs as a passphrase sharing mechanism. Again, better than nothing, but you have to think about your security model. If you are protecting your Google accounts really, really well, maybe you're enrolled in the Google Advanced Protection Program, which enforces security keys for everyone in your org. And you know, you only have people logging into their accounts on known safe devices like Chromebooks and smartphones. Maybe it's okay, but we definitely recommend using a fully featured password manager that's built for that sort of thing instead of just say like a Google spreadsheet. So.
Awesome. And then, yes, this session will be available. We'll send it out in the recording. Cool. And I'll hand it back to you, Tris, for email security.
Yeah, so now that we know how to protect our online accounts in general, we want to look at a couple of ways to protect against spoofed emails. So the big problem with email is that it's inherently just really not that secure. We've tried so many times over the lifespan of the internet to improve the situation with these little incremental changes, but modern email protocols still have their roots in the very, very early days of the internet. We just have a bunch of these security mechanisms sort of bolted on and optional. So as a result, it's really, really hard to know if the sender of an email is who they say they are. It's often impossible to know if an email could have been read by an attacker in transit. And we haven't even started talking about nasty links that people could put in emails or attachments. But let's talk about the first problem here first, the sender authentication problem. So anyone can change the from line on an email and still have a pretty good chance of passing through all your organization's spam filters. There are definitely mitigations in place that your org can do, and lots of folks have done a really, really good job of this. Gmail specifically has done a lot, and in the Google Workspace product. But even if you have these mitigations in place for things like spoofing your exact email domain, or comparing display names of email senders with people inside your organization and alerting when they sent them with an unrecognized email address, those sorts of things aren't stopping people from using lookalike domain names like actblues.com instead of actblue.com, or just changing their signature and hoping you don't notice the mismatch between the signature and the display name. So usually emails that mislead you about their origin have one of three goals. They want to steal your password, steal your organization's money, or get you to install malware on your computer, usually without you noticing. So fortunately, most of these emails have some pretty clear red flags. We've got 3 example emails that we're going to go through. Each one will give you a few seconds to look and check and see if you have any ideas what's going on. So this is the first one. This is adapted from a real email that a former coworker sent to me. And we'll go over the problems in detail soon. But if you want to take a guess as to the issues, feel free to put them in meeting chat now. I'll give you a couple seconds to do that. So. Yeah, so lots of good examples in here. Can we get the next? Yeah, so people pointed out the discrepancy between the name and the signature and the name and the from address. People pointed out that it's from an external address. It's a Gmail account, and it's not using like a corporate email address. The weird spacing and the bad wording, definitely. I don't usually write emails like this. A couple things that you couldn't tell just from the content of this email, but that I do want to point out. The biggest problem here is that I was in the same room as the person who received this email and forwarded it to me when it got sent. And we actually had self-service tools in place to change our direct deposit information online. So there was really no reason for this email to get sent at all in the first place. So that was a huge red flag. Anyway, you can tell that the goal here is to tamper with our payroll information. So just siphoning money away until either someone from HR or I noticed. The only other thing of note that you folks didn't point out already is that the sender probably got all of their information from LinkedIn. My name and job title were usually formatted a little differently in my real email signature, but they match exactly what I had published on LinkedIn at the time. I also had a connection on LinkedIn to the recipient of this email. So just be aware of where your job-related information is available publicly online and what people can find out about your organization just from public resources like that. So yeah, so here's the next one. This one is a little less obvious, but if anyone has any ideas, feel free to put them in meeting chat now. Yeah, so a couple of folks are pointing out that it's telling you to download something, and this is pretty much the point. Somebody also mentioned that it looks like an Outlook encrypted message. One of the problems is that yes, there is a real legitimate service that sends emails that look almost word for word identical to this. Generally, you should be fairly skeptical of messages claiming to be secure email services. If you are regularly receiving these sorts of emails, make sure you know exactly who you're receiving them from. Make sure they tell you in advance every time when you should be expecting one of these. If you're not expecting an email like this, even if you are expecting an email like this, be really, really careful with the attachments. Somebody mentioned that attachments can contain malware. That's absolutely true. Be really, really careful with Microsoft Office files, PDFs, and of course, executable programs. These are really common malware vectors. Microsoft and PDF reader vendors have done a really good job of stepping up security recently, but these files can still be really, really dangerous. A great example is just earlier this week, a vulnerability in, it was really the Windows operating system, but the vector was mostly Office documents. The attack was that somebody could get you to just open an Office document, no other action required, and then whoever sent you the Office document could execute code on your computer. That could be just as simple as opening up a calculator window, so just proving the point of the exploit, or they could be installing malware right there. So these files can still be pretty dangerous, just be careful with them. Somebody also mentioned credential theft. Somebody also mentioned credential theft on that last one. If you were to download and open that attachment, you would just get a really sketchy looking login page. The goal of this email was to steal your credentials. Just don't enter your password on any website or into any application that isn't familiar with you. Like Amy said, your password manager is often going to autofill passwords for you if you get that set up. And if it's not doing that, you should be suspicious. So this next one is the last example email we're going to look at. If anyone has any ideas on this one, feel free to drop them in meeting chat now. Yeah, so lots of really good answers here. There's maybe from content, this might seem benign to you, but there are three pretty major red flags. Could we advance the slide, please? Yeah, perfect, thanks. So yeah, the mail.com address is a good one. Again, the generic from address unrelated to the organization is pretty big. This one was also sent to a personal email address, even though the person was in the same organization and this org had like internal email. The really vague subject line, no details about what the thing is in the email, that's a big red flag. The request for non-email contact information is also a really, really big red flag. If you're moving to a non-email channel like text messages, you're more likely to respond faster, which is great for the attacker. But more importantly, you're likely to let your guard down in a text message, not in a different way than you would in just an email conversation. If you did give the attacker a personal cell phone number, they would have texted you with instructions to buy gift cards with a promise that, oh, I'm the executive director of your organization, I'll just reimburse you later. Obviously, the reimbursement would never come. You should be really suspicious of anyone asking you to buy gift cards in an email or otherwise. They're a very, very common scam mechanism to steal money from organizations because they're really, really easy to get across borders. And once spent, it can be very, very hard to reverse gift card transactions. So yeah, so key takeaways here is just think twice before doing anything based on instructions you get in an email, especially before you open attachments, especially before you enter passwords, or definitely avoid sending passwords over email. And definitely think twice before you're making purchases, sending money, doing anything that costs you or your org money based on email directions. If you do think an email has a chance of being legitimate, it's always okay to confirm out of band with the person who supposedly sent it. So say you get an email that's supposedly from your org's IT staff and it prompts you to change your password because it's about to expire. You could always call them or send them a chat message internally to confirm it's legitimate. Be careful about this though. Don't use a phone number that's in, say, the email signature because that can be spoofed along with the rest of the email. So if you have questions, we'll go through them in meeting chat. Somebody asked, how can a PDF transmit malware? It's not necessarily that the PDF itself is containing malware. It might be that it's got a link or something to download malware. However, there are exploits in PDF readers. So basically, an attacker can construct a badly formatted PDF that exploits basically just the way your PDF viewer reads the file. So it's not as big of a risk these days. We've gotten a lot better at writing safe software that isn't vulnerable to this sort of thing. But really just any large complex format, and PDFs definitely are one, can have these kinds of issues in viewer programs. So yeah, I didn't see anything else in meeting chat, so we'll move on to physical and device security next. If you did have any more questions about email security, we'll go over them at the end of the talk. So the big problem I want to address here is devices left unattended. So if you ever work out of a coffee shop or you let a stranger borrow your phone, have you thought about what somebody can do with your device with just a few minutes of access? Can they maybe switch to your web browser or your email app and read your emails? Do you stay logged into Slack? Can somebody scroll through that and take a picture of it? It's the same deal with anything written down on paper. If you leave a notebook out on a table and then go refill your coffee, is it going to cause damage to your organization's reputation if somebody takes a picture while you're gone and shares it with the New York Times or something? And we haven't even started talking about people stealing your device or your notebook when you're not looking. That presents a whole different set of issues. Maybe you lock your screen, but can data be extracted from your hard drive? So, and speaking of locking your screen, that is number one, the most effective thing you could do to protect against folks who only have access to your device for a few minutes. Make sure you've got a PIN or a password set, or you've got Touch ID, Face ID, something like that. Then manually lock your screen before going to refill your coffee or something. Also, definitely recommend configuring an automatic screen lock. For example, I've got mine on my laptop. Even when I have it at home, it locks after 5 minutes. All I have to do is enter my password when I come back. It's a little bit of a hassle, but it's definitely worth it in case I forget while I have it while I'm out. If you let people borrow your phone frequently, there's this neat Android feature that not a lot of people know about. It's called app pinning. The idea here is that you could restrict folks borrowing your phone to just one app. So if they need to make a phone call, you open the phone app for them, you pin it, and then they'll only be able to use the phone app until you enter your pin again. It's not perfect because, say, all of your contacts show up in the phone app, right? But it's a really useful tool to have available anyway. The path to that in security settings is up here, or if you just Google Android app pinning, you'll find it. Obviously, you can't lock the screen on paper or office badges or keys, so be careful with those. And ideally, just don't leave them out if you can avoid it. So second mitigation that's also really important is encryption. Encryption protects the data on your device using a secret key. That key can be generated by a security chip inside your computer. It can be based on a PIN or a password, or both. That's the case on a lot of modern phones. Without this key, even somebody who has physical access to your device can't read or change the data on it. So if you don't encrypt your laptop, it's often possible to install malware, change your login password, or steal data with just a few minutes of access. The device doesn't even necessarily have to be stolen for these kinds of attacks. Phones are in a pretty good situation. These sorts of malware installation attempts are pretty well thwarted. Modern MacBooks are in a good position too. Modern Windows machines are in a pretty good spot too. But in any case, if your device isn't encrypted and it gets stolen, an attacker can pull the hard drive out and read all your data. If you do encrypt your device, somebody needs to know your password or trick the security chip into releasing those encryption keys. Of course, both are possible. Maybe you accidentally reused your encryption password, or you wrote it down somewhere and somebody managed to steal that as well. But encryption really, really reduces the risk. And like I said at the beginning of the talk, it just raises the bar for attackers to get at your data. If you're given the option, make sure to encrypt your device with a PIN or a passphrase. Some versions of Windows will offer to encrypt your device with an automatic unlock option. Really, really convenient, but it takes a skilled attacker about 30 minutes to bypass this automatic unlock in the worst case. I think we've got a link in our security checklist that we'll send out after the talk about this specific attack if you're interested in the details. And like Amy was talking about in the password section, it's important not to reuse your passwords. And of course, that applies to your encryption passphrase too. So how do you go about encrypting your device? The good news is that there's a pretty good chance that your device is already encrypted in some way. Modern versions of iOS and modern Android versions on certain hardware will do it automatically if you set a PIN or a password, but you can always double check. In iOS, if you go to the passcode setup screen, you'll see the text data protection is enabled at the bottom. On Android, you can go into security settings, the path is up here, and check and see if encryption is enabled. On macOS and Windows, you do have to put in a little bit of effort. macOS has File Vault. That's in security settings. We'll have a link to an Apple documentation article on how to set that up. On Windows, you either get device encryption or BitLocker in your security settings. Sometimes it's enabled by default, but more often than not, it's not. You can find this option and turn it on. Again, if you're offered the option to choose an encryption PIN or password, make sure you do that instead of allowing automatic unlock. In any case, on a laptop or desktop computer, you're probably going to get offered a recovery key when you set this up. It's really, really important that you save this recovery key. Just like an attacker who doesn't know your password can't access your data, if you forget your password, you also won't be able to access your data. The recovery key is really your only way out here. That and having a strong backup strategy, but that's outside the scope of this talk. So let's say you've done all these steps. You've set up screen lock, you've set up device encryption, you're fairly safe, but say your device does get stolen. The good news is you're probably mostly okay. It's going to be rough for an attacker to steal data off your device. They're more likely to try to factory reset it and maybe resell it for money. But there are some steps you can take. Think about the services that you were logged into on your device. Did you have a Google account signed in? Were you logged into Slack or another internal chat system? If so, check to see if you can log out these sessions remotely. If you have internal IT resources and those accounts were managed by your org, they might be able to help with this. Sometimes it's even possible to delete data from those apps remotely. Again, your org might be able to help you do this selectively. If all else fails, most hardware manufacturers and software and operating system vendors offer a Find My Device type tool, which usually allows you to remotely factory reset the device too. How to do this depends on your operating system, and you may have to do some setup steps. Definitely would recommend just clicking one or going to one of these links. We'll have them in the security checklist after the talk, and just making sure that these services can talk to your device. Make sure you do this in advance of actually needing to do it, right? Because if there are any problems with it, you'll probably need to press some buttons and settings on your phone or laptop to get everything working. So make sure to do this in advance. So one more thing, just try not to keep sensitive data on your device if you can need it. Think memos, reports, spreadsheets. If you can avoid downloading those to your device at all, and you could just work off of, say, Excel Online or Google Docs, if you're able to use those, the web app versions, that's definitely preferred. If you do that, remotely logging out of your accounts can be a lot more effective than it would otherwise. If you're able to work only on web apps like this, the logical extension of this device is using, say, like a Chromebook or an iPad as your primary work device. The software running on these devices is built totally differently from, say, Windows. It reduces the attack surface so much. If you're able to use it, definitely check it out. If you do download data, don't keep it too long. It might be worth setting aside some time every week or two just to tidy up your documents, downloads, desktop, in your home folder. Just make sure that you aren't using, or make sure that you delete any data that you aren't using regularly, is the idea there. So yeah, key takeaways here: lock your screen with a PIN and password, set a screen timeout so that your screen automatically locks. Check if your device is encrypted and start encrypting it if it's not. Take action when a device is stolen, so report the device stolen to your IT folks if you have one. Log out of your Google account remotely if not, that sort of thing. And if you're downloading sensitive data, just make sure to clean up regularly. I did see a handful of questions on this one. If you have any more, feel free to drop them in meeting chat now. Is app pinning available on iPhone? To my knowledge, I don't use an iPhone, I run Android, but to my knowledge, it's not. The closest thing you could get is what's called assigned access. It requires a bunch of setup up front. That being said, if you're looking at using like an iPad as like a kiosk device or something or like a guest device that a lot of folks will use, it may be what you want, but it's a lot different from app pinning as it exists on Android.
Yeah, and on iPhone, you can like, if you're just, letting like someone use your phone to call someone, you can just type in the number for them and then lock your phone and then hand it to them. So they would still need your password to get in. So little workaround.
Yeah, that's a good one. Any experience with the Prey app? No, we would tend to recommend if you have the Android or iOS or Microsoft's methods available, you should use those. They tend to be the most reliable, and they don't necessarily cost any more money. How do you set up remote logout? We'll have information with all of those links on the security checklist after the talk. For specific kinds of services, it generally depends on the service. For Google accounts, for example, if you go to the little My Account icon, if you're on any Google service, there's usually an option to look at devices logged in. You can click on any of them and log out. You don't really need to do any setup in advance for that. For different services, it's different for everything. So if you have questions about a specific service, it's probably worth talking to the support org for them just to see if that's available. So, all right. And with all that, I'll hand it back over to Amy to talk about internet security.
Cool. Internet security, fun stuff. So these are just some general best practices to keep your internet security up to snuff. The first is simply keep your firewall enabled. A firewall protects your apps running on your computer from using unnecessary connections to other computers. Most operating systems already have this enabled by default, so you don't really have to worry about it. Just don't turn it off. They aren't really an issue on phones, so you don't really need to worry about that. Same for antivirus software. It protects you from malicious programs. And again, most have this built in. Windows has Defender, Mac has a version of this called Gatekeeper. Phones don't typically need antivirus as long as you keep an eye on what permissions you grant to apps. So I know that there's some apps out there, cough, cough, TikTok, that rumor has it that they can like track all your clicks on your phone. So keep an eye on those permissions that you're granting. And also a simple one is just keep your operating system up to date. Security bugs are found all the time in every operating system. No one is immune. So get those updates automatically and pay attention to when your device says that it actually needs an update and don't put it off like I sometimes used to. If your device doesn't do those updates automatically or at all, then that's a red flag and don't use it to access sensitive info. And another thing that people tend to forget about is limiting your AirDrop. That's on Apple devices. I'm not sure what the Windows version of that is called, but basically the device file sharing thing. Limit it to contacts only or just disable it completely when you're not using it. It's very possible to set them up wrong and to accidentally share info. And also some people are just like going to send you random stuff and sometimes malicious stuff that you don't want. One time I was letting a friend host a party at my apartment because I'm a great friend, and she invited some friends who invited more friends who I didn't know, and it was 3 a.m. and I wanted them out of my house because I wanted pizza and I wanted to go to bed. So I turned on my AirDrop, and everyone who had their AirDrop available, I sent them a picture of my dog and told them to leave. So it was very effective, but if you don't want someone like me messing with your party, then turn your AirDrop off. And insecure connections to websites. HTTP and HTTPS are protocols on your web browser that's used to access websites, right? You see that at the beginning of every URL. Basically, the S means secure. On an HTTP site, any info you send, the website can be read by attackers, and the responses can also be changed before it reaches you. So that's a problem. So it's really important not to share passwords or credit card numbers or really sensitive information over plain old HTTP websites. But on the other hand, HTTPS, the attacker can only see the domain name. So they can only see google.com or actionnetwork.org. They can't see the group name. They can't see your search query on Google. And this is improving too. A new version of TLS is making it even harder for attackers to even see the name of the site. So to keep this up to, to keep an eye on this, on Chrome, there's this little lock icon next to the URL, and that will show you if it's HTTP or HTTPS. And there's also an HTTP everywhere extension, or HTTPS everywhere. Oh my God, I can't say this. HTTPS everywhere extension. And so that makes sure that you're using HTTPS on all the websites that you can. And some browsers also have HTTPS only mode, but note that this will mess with like some of your websites because it wait, no, wrong thing. Ignore that. Ignore me. More on that in the security checklist. Wi-Fi networks. So Wi-Fi networks are unavoidable risk. We got to have our Wi-Fi, right? So the goal has to be to mitigate that risk. So be careful with open Wi-Fi networks. And by open, we mean no password is required. this broadcasts your traffic to anyone who really cares to read it. It's okay if you're using HTTPS only websites, because if you don't mind people just seeing the name of the website, then you're fine, but still a risk. And even when a password is required on a Wi-Fi network, you're not automatically safe because so many people can have that password. I'm just thinking of my favorite coffee shop. There's at least 20 people in there at a time, and that's cycling every hour. That's a lot of people with the Wi-Fi password. But this is improving. There's a new WPA3 Wi-Fi encryption that solves this issue, but it's not standard yet. And it needs support from both the Wi-Fi network and your device, but hopefully coming soon to a theater near you. But generally, just be as safe as possible. Use your phone hotspot with a strong Wi-Fi instead of the airport Wi-Fi or the coffee shop Wi-Fi. And even at your own home, don't broadcast your Wi-Fi password broadly. If your router has a guest Wi-Fi network function, use that, especially for people that may be coming in and out of your house a lot that you don't really know, like your dog sitter or something. And insecure messaging. So similar to insecure websites, attackers can sniff out traffic between your messaging apps. And this situation is better. Most of these apps have HTTPS protocols or something similar built in, but the messages are unencrypted on things like Google Chat or Slack. And texting is a question mark too. Your provider might store messages in case the recipient's phone isn't online, or maybe they don't delete the messages properly, or maybe they're just being a bad company and logging your data on purpose. And attackers can also use fake cell sites to intercept SMS messages, but that's not really super common. So mitigation for this is to use a reputable secure messaging app like Signal. This provides encryption end to end. And even when your messages are intercepted and stored, they can't be read by attackers because they're encrypted. And this is also helpful if your phone is stolen. But if your phone is stolen, it's a kind of a problem because the messages are still there, right? So for anything particularly sensitive, use disappearing messages, which is a feature on Signal. So last one, maybe. Nope, it's not. Online ads. Online ads are a sneaky one. Ads can be placed and have no relationship to the hosting site. So I might be on Sally's Baking Addiction looking up a carrot cake recipe and it says to download the recipe, but the download the recipe button might be a hidden bug. It might download something to my computer like malware that I don't want there. And Sally's Baking Addiction did not approve that, and Sally would be very disappointed. This can be, on a different software publisher's website or a hidden code that automatically exploits a bug in your browser. And so mitigation is to use a reputable ad blocking extension. It definitely makes the internet a lot more pleasant and safer to use. We recommend using uBlock Origin. It has a good reputation. It has a good default blocking list, and it's very customizable. But if you're really worried about this sort of attack, just separate your casual web browsing from your work web browsing and use it on different computers, or install an extension like NoScript, which blocks all dynamic code from running on your website browser. Though, because it blocks all dynamic code, this can break a lot of websites. So it's not super practical, but it's an option if you need it to be there. And bad browser extensions. Be super careful when you're installing extensions and be wary of the permissions that they request. Your browser by design can see everything you do, right? So you're trusting it not to send your password to a third party. You're trusting it to keep your login sessions safe. And you're trusting it not to change the content of your web pages. But when you install an extension, you're extending some of that trust to the authors of the extension as well. So be careful with permissions, especially the access browsing data on all site permission. There's really very few that actually need this. Only things like ad blockers or password managers need that kind of access. A YouTube video downloader certainly does not. So after this, training, take a few minutes to check the extensions on your web browser. It takes like 2 seconds. Make sure that you recognize everything there and that the permissions are correct. If you're using Firefox, they have a really cool recommended extension program where they review the extensions to make sure they're not malicious. Chrome doesn't have anything similar, but like a girl can dream. So let's go ahead and take some questions. Let me scroll on up.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Tris.
I Yeah, so I've got a couple here. Somebody asked about Slack and what we mean when we say, like, use Signal for sensitive information. The idea here is that Slack, just by design, the regulatory requirements that it can meet, and just the message history, that sort of functionality, it kind of relies on Slack being able to read all your messages, basically. I'm not saying that Slack employees are reading all your messages, but those messages are not like locked just to approved devices that you've logged in on, if that makes sense. Think about if you add a new person to your Slack team, they can read all of your history, right? Even on like the free plan where Slack says, you can't see more than 10,000 of your messages, they have all those messages, and they offer like a compliance export feature. So if somebody gets admin in your Slack organization, they can export all of the messages in there, including private ones. So Slack is definitely, we would consider it a secure platform, but just be careful with super sensitive information, and just be mindful that those messages are not stored encrypted in as meaningful a way as they are with apps like Signal. I've got a couple more, but Amy, if you had one.
Go for it.
Yeah, so somebody asked about plane or train Wi-Fi. It's the same deal there. Any Wi-Fi network that doesn't require a password or requires a common password, just generally be careful with it. With plane or train Wi-Fi specifically, because phone hotspots don't really work on planes, just be mindful of the kind of work that you're doing. Avoid maybe working on super sensitive documents. Avoid downloading anything from unencrypted websites. Definitely look into the HTTPS Everywhere extension that we talked about. That'll be in the security checklist. Let's see. Somebody asked about security for like Internet of Things devices. I think that was the question. With those, if you're able to get those on a separate Wi-Fi network, like a guest Wi-Fi network, definitely do that. Generally, the issue there is that manufacturers will sell a smart home product sort of deal, and then they'll stop offering security updates for it a couple years down the road, or in the worst cases, a couple months down the road. The way to mitigate the risk of those devices is just making sure they can't sort of see the other computers on your network. So if you're able to connect them to a guest Wi-Fi network that your router has, definitely check that out. Somebody asked about Ghostery or Privacy Badger. Privacy Badger I know is reputable. It's been a while since I've evaluated Ghostery, so I don't have any specific comments on that. Same deal with Brave. Would have to look into that in a little more detail. But definitely using Firefox or Chrome with a good ad blocking extension is definitely sufficient. And yeah, great point on NoScript. If you're not willing to put in the time and effort to train it about what websites are allowed to execute scripts, you're going to have a super broken internet browsing experience. So really good comment there. Yeah, so there's a couple more notes. There were a couple of questions about VPN that came up. And I think I want to save those till the end, if that's okay with you, Amy.
Perfect. Yeah, because I know we're running short on time, but this section's short, and then we'll have time for all the other questions. So vendor security, we're your vendor. That's what we do. We provide you with email and texting tools. It's great. You love them. And we see security as a shared responsibility between both you and with us. So part of this, what we do is enforcing secure connections. We also encrypt data once it's in our database. Our staff are trained in security best practices. They have to sit through a training where they're bribed to pay attention with prizes. And we also have a bunch of policies in place to prevent attackers from successfully getting your data through support requests. For example, we won't add a group admin and we won't email you reports. We will just guide you through the process of doing that yourself. For what you can do, it's very easy. We make it easy for you. How nice of us. What first thing you should do is enable two-factor authentication on your account. Just go to your profile, enable two-factor, set up Authy, recommend it, and turn off text. Great. We also have a group setting that requires all admins to set up 2FA. It won't lock anyone out of their account, so don't worry about that. It'll just prompt them to set up 2FA before they can access any of the group's data again. or access any of the group actions. And one thing that I love to emphasize is you should always have more than one group admin. If an account gets compromised, someone can remove that person or restore access. Always have more than one group admin. Excellent. So final thoughts, Tris?
Yeah, so just to recap everything that we covered today, top 5 things, enable two-factor on any accounts that support it, definitely at least your important ones today. We've got a list of accounts that you might want to look at in our security checklist. Like we said, if those accounts offer a security key option and you have a security key, definitely think about using it. Google accounts are the big one there. In any case, avoid text messaging or phone call-based authentication if you can. Use a password manager. 1Password and LastPass are great options. You can adopt them incrementally too. Every time you log into a site that's not in your password manager, just change the password to a strong random one and add it to your password manager. Be skeptical of weird emails. If somebody asks you to buy gift cards or, hey, just send me your password just so I can confirm it's you, those are huge red flags. If you're suspicious at all, but you're not quite sure that the email is just total garbage, just confirm the request out of band. Make a phone call, send a Slack message, whatever. Use a trusted ad blocker in your web browser. uBlock Origin, again, great option. It can help you stay safe from drive-by malware attacks, which aren't common but are very real threats. No web browser extension solution is totally safe. So if you're really, really concerned about this, consider separating like high security web browsing requirements out to a different computer if you're able, or look into NoScript as an option. Watch out for bad browser extensions, especially ones that ask for full access to your data on every website. Not a lot of those extensions need it. Go check on your extensions and just uninstall any that you don't recognize or don't use anymore. So yeah, I do want to address the VPN questions. So somebody asked, have you ever seen VPN conflict with Windows Firewall? I've operated a lot of corporate VPNs in the past and never really ran into that issue. I'll talk about personal VPNs in a second, but generally, if you're seeing an issue when you connect to an organizational VPN, definitely talk with that whoever set up the VPN, because those generally are. It's definitely possible to get those working together without decreasing your firewall security. About personal VPNs when on insecure Wi-Fi connections, these can definitely be a mitigation, but generally we're pretty hesitant to recommend them. They expose the attack surface, or they increase your attack surface a lot more. Often you're using a proprietary app that hasn't been audited by many folks to connect to the VPN. There's been a lot of sort of fly-by-night VPN companies that just sort of pop up and don't really have very clear data practices. They might claim, oh, we don't log your traffic, et cetera, but there hasn't there hasn't necessarily been an independent audit of that, right? So it also just shifts the problem, right? Folks on your local network might not be able to see your traffic, but the folks who operate the VPN definitely are able to see that traffic. When VPNs say we encrypt your internet browsing using military-grade encryption, they mean right up to the VPN provider. Right as soon as you hit a VPN provider server, they're able to see that traffic and correlate it back to you. So definitely be skeptical of that. Someone asked about Google VPN specifically. That's, if you've got that built into your phone, that's probably a better option than a lot of sort of just random pop-up VPN companies. But the same concerns apply. That means Google can see all your network traffic in a way they couldn't before. Somebody asked about talking about protection from companies whose business model is surveillance. Fantastic question. With Google, if you're able to get your organization to pay for a Google Workspace account, there's actually a separate data privacy and practices agreement for your Gmail data, your Drive data, et cetera, that Google and your organization would enter into. Strongly recommend that if you're able to. In terms of surveillance companies that have really just a free product and that's it, like Facebook, container tabs, like someone in the audience here mentioned, I can't find the message anymore. Firefox has this feature called container tabs, which isolates your browsing activity, so cookies, history, whatever, into different containers. So Facebook can be totally unaware of all the other browsing you're doing, even if they embed like tracking pixels into other sites. So definitely worth checking that out. In general, trusted ad blocker can really help out a lot with this. For example, the uBlock Origin default list does a lot to try to block third-party like tracking pixels. Firefox has this thing called enhanced tracking protection. It's pretty good. It's enabled by default in incognito mode tabs, I think, but you can enable it for the whole browser as well. So I don't think I have any more notes on that specifically. Somebody asked back in the passwords section about having a personal LastPass with no work passwords in it, and asked if they should add their work passwords to it. Ideally, if you're able to get your work to pay for a separate LastPass account, definitely do that. That's a better option. It's always great to separate your personal and work accounts so that you can focus on those work accounts. But if your work is not going to sponsor like an organization-wide password management program, storing those in your personal LastPass is definitely a better decision than just keeping them on paper using the same password. So. Are there any best practices to help ensure that folks are complying with an org's security standards? Yeah, great question. So if your organization has access to like Google Workspace device management, Office 365 has a similar bit of functionality. It's fairly non-invasive. It's a way to, they both offer ways to sort of sandbox work data into, on Android, it's called like a work profile. I think on iOS, there's certain like data encryption standards that get applied to that data. If you have that option in your Google Workspace or Office 365 plan, that's worth looking into. In terms of other ways to ensure that folks are complying with an org security standards, really just, yeah, like you mentioned, trainings and frequent security messaging is about as good as you're going to get. You can do these sort of adversarial training techniques, like sending out phishing messages to your own employees. There's definitely ethical concerns here. There's been lots of stories in the news, especially over COVID, where these phishing messages have been like, click here to sign up for your $2,000 COVID bonus, when there's really no bonus money there, and you get redirected to phishing training when you click on that. So you definitely have to be careful with the ethical concerns surrounding that. But that sort of adversarial training is a great way to help folks sort of understand security risks. But yeah, definitely be careful with the ethics, definitely be careful and make sure that it's not punitive and that you're maintaining a good relationship between your IT and security org and the rest of your organization. That's really key there. If your users don't trust you as security, you're not going to have a very effective security program. So, yeah, I don't see any other questions in the chat.
Yeah, I think we might have got them all. I know folks have had to hop off. We've been a little over, but that's okay. So if anyone has any other questions, you can contact support and they'll put you in touch with Tris or I to answer your questions. We'll send out the security checklist after the training, as well as a recording to this training, so you can tell everyone to listen to the lovely sound of our voices. But everyone have a great rest of your day.